Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in. We're back by popular demand with another edition of Commonsense Conversations with the Alliance for Gun Responsibility. Today, we wanted to mix things up a little bit and give you all a more in-depth look at our endorsement process. So to that end, I'm joined by two of my wonderful colleagues, Stephanie Ervin, our PAC Director, and Dylan O'Connor, our Political and Government Affairs Manager. Thank you both for doing this.
Yeah, excited to talk about the PAC.
Great to be here.
Great. So to get us started, I want to pass it over to you, Steph, to talk a bit about how and why the PAC got started.
Sure. As you know, we started the PAC in 2014, and we had tried twice to pass universal background checks through the legislature, but couldn't get any traction. So while we went to the ballot to pass universal background checks, we knew that we also needed to build political power with candidates for office for the long term, that if we passed our statewide measure, even by a large majority, which we went on to get, that it wasn't going to be enough to make sure progress continued on this issue. And we certainly weren't stopping at background checks. So back then, when we were asking candidates to participate in our process, we really had to push elected leaders to seek our endorsement and to use it once they got it. But we've come a long way. We endorse candidates now at the local, state, and federal level. And that first year, we really only endorsed a handful of candidates. This year, we've endorsed 59 so far, and that list is just going to grow as the cycle continues. And I think it's exciting that there are so many candidates that are seeking our endorsement. I think we've interviewed 90 so far this cycle. Maybe you'll remember the exact number.
Thank you, Steph. Definitely not. But I completely agree. I think each year the crop of candidates we endorse gets so much more impressive. Now I want to turn it over to you, Dylan, to give a little context behind all of those interviews. Can you give a brief overview of our endorsement process?
Yeah, you got it. I actually think we're getting close to about 100 interviews this cycle so far, which is a ton. So our endorsement process is fairly straightforward. Candidates all over the state, especially in a year like this where it's a local cycle, reach out to us seeking our endorsement and then fill out a questionnaire, which gives us a good baseline of understanding on who they are, what they're running for, what the political landscape is in their race, and ask questions about their understanding of gun violence in general, as well as the preventative measures we know work to prevent gun violence. Also ask things on racial justice and policy and equity. Several specific gun safety policy questions about if they support these things, and then how they feel about police accountability at its intersection with gun violence prevention in general. After that, we receive the questionnaire and we schedule an interview, and a lot of our staff get to kind of pop in and out and ask really great questions of candidates, and how it's a really good process for exchanging information and new policy ideas. It's a really great process, educational for both us and for candidates. And then, once we're, done with a slew of 20-minute to 30-minute interviews, depending on the office, we kind of round up. Our staff rounds up and discusses those interviews and goes about a scoring process and discuss everything under the sun about the candidate and their race. And then brings those recommendations to our PAC board, which is always a lively discussion. And that's where the final decisions on endorsements get made.
Great, thanks, Dylan. Steph, I wonder if you can go through how we've changed our process in the last year.
Sure. Well, for one thing, we've expanded the group of people from our team who participate in the endorsement process. So in the past, we had sort of staff members kind of pinch hit when some of us weren't available for a particular interview time, but actually we learned pretty quickly what value they add to those conversations. And the more team members that we have intentionally included in the last two cycles, including this year, has been super beneficial, I think, both for our team and candidates. The candidates get a chance to meet more folks from our team, and our team members get to talk about their work and get their questions answered from their particular sort of point of view and lens on the work. So that's been a really great change to our process in the last couple of years. The other thing that we've done is throughout, especially in our local races process, really emphasized the importance and support of community-based violence prevention organizations and the work that they do on the ground in community. So local candidates were encouraging specifically to make those organizations and that work sustainable. And we have over the years talked about that work in local candidate endorsement interviews. But this year we actually invited some of those community partners to speak for themselves, especially in our Seattle mayoral contests.
Great, thanks, Steph. So, I just want to say, I think our conversations this last year have been made much richer by the changes that you just highlighted. And so really kudos to the whole team for getting us to this place. I know it's been a lot of work and really appreciate the investment that you've all made. So it's almost time for us to wrap up. Before we go, Kristen is going to make us answer one more question. So let's start with Steph. High and low, or high or low, of the endorsement process?
I think a low for me is just when candidates aren't prepared for the conversation, haven't thought about what their role is in preventing gun violence, or the worst case scenario, of course, when candidates just don't show up for their interview slot. That's super rare, but it's really annoying for me because I hate then becoming like the rescheduler of all candidate interviews. I hate scheduling and I don't have time to do it all. So that's definitely the worst part of the process. But again, it's pretty rare. And the high, I think, is definitely getting to know candidates from all over the state, hear their sort of ideas and learn more about the communities that they're running in and the challenges that they face. We interviewed a candidate for Ellensburg City Council, for example, who just like blew me away. We asked sort of an opening question and she took 5 minutes to just tell us about her personal background and what was sort of animating and motivating her to do the sort of tough work that's required in preventing gun violence. And she shared with us sort of how she thinks about the world and the bigger picture. So that, I think, is the fun part, is getting to know candidates and hear where they're coming from.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that, Steph. Dylan, what about for you?
Yeah, I think the low for me, and similar to Steph, is when folks show up and sort of assume that being against gun violence is enough to have an in-depth policy conversation. Happens more often than you'd think. We really enjoy the conversations where folks come with ideas and have done their research about what we do. That's another part of the low, is when folks jump on and obviously they've done very surface level research into what we do, and there's often a misunderstanding on the breadth of work that the Alliance is engaged in, from policy development, passage, implementation. And then, the high point is sort of the opposite of that, where we get to learn, especially in a cycle like this, from local candidates on what different sort of like, I won't say lower profile, but not as big and flashy elected positions can do to move the needle forward on gun violence prevention. So for example, we've had a ton of interviews with port commissioner candidates and school board candidates this year, and way more than in any other cycle. They're coming with really in-depth knowledge on what they want to do to prevent gun violence in their positions. And so Steph, Renee, and I, and I'm sure you'll echo this, come away from some of those conversations like, oh my gosh, we have so much work to do. I'm going to start researching this point that was brought up about armed, campus resource officers, school resource officers, and their distribution in a city. And just everything under the sun that way has been really great for me.
Yeah, I think this cycle for sure, we've definitely learned more from the candidates than we ever have before, which is really great and exciting for us. So we are at time, but I want to make sure I give both Steph and Dylan an opportunity for any last minute or last words before we check out. So Dylan, do you have anything you want to say before we're done today?
Just that more the merrier. If you're seeking elected office, whether this year or in years coming up, we want to talk to you. No matter what you're running for, please reach out.
Great. And Steph, any last words from you?
Sure. Well, first, you can find our full list of candidate endorsements on our website, gunresponsibility.org. But I also want to put a plug in for our first ever mayoral forum. Our local partners, Grandmothers Against Gun Violence, often host an in-person candidate forum, but we decided to team up this year and host our first ever Seattle Mayoral Forum. That's next week on Monday. Same time and place as here if you want to view it live on Facebook. And I think we're re-airing it later in the evening too. And if you haven't already, please RSVP and submit your questions. We want to hear from you. We'll make sure the link in particular is in the comments for this video, so you can check that out.
Great. Well, thanks, Steph and Dylan. It's been fun interviewing you guys. Really appreciate all of the hard work into the endorsement process this year. And who knows, maybe we'll have some candidates on for some common sense conversations in the coming weeks.
Thank
you.